a senior fellow and student co-convener for the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative, or DCI for short. Our presentation today has multiple parts and is designed to be very dynamic and interactive. I'm honored to kick us off with a brief introduction to the DCI, and then a group of DCI fellows, myself included, will participate in a demonstration of how our deliberations are structured and facilitated. The topic of our mock deliberation is the relationship between free speech and inclusion, and whether a college's duty is to primarily protect or challenge students. Our fellows will then share more about the DCI's programs, including our D teams, deliberative forums, and their own personal deliberation projects. We'll conclude with an opportunity for you all to deliberate amongst yourselves on a range of interesting topics following the DCI's conversation agreements and facilitated by our fellows. But first, a little bit of background about the DCI. In 2020, the DCI was created in response to our country's growing polarization and increasing difficulty in fostering deep engagement on our most contentious issues. It is a campus and community-wide project focused on the uses of deliberation as an alternative to the non-constructive crosstalk that has come to dominate our public discourse. Its purpose is to create opportunities for Davidson students, faculty, staff, alumni, and members of the wider community to productively engage with one another on difficult and controversial issues that are facing our community and society. The initiative aims to teach deliberative skills, including the ability to listen actively and to understand the arguments of others, as well as develop good arguments of one's own. It also aims to reinforce humane instincts, build meaningful community, catalyze creative solutions to important concerns, and analyze the deliberative processes of the initiative itself, identifying both its strengths and limits, as well as support research on deliberative practices. The DCI creates opportunities for deliberation in the classroom, on campus, and in the community. It supports faculty members interested in incorporating deliberation into their courses by organizing workshops, hosting discussion groups, and publicizing deliberation-involved courses. For example, the Deliberative Pedagogy Collaborative, a community of faculty members dedicated to learning about and utilizing innovative ways to foster deliberation in their courses, was launched in 2021. The DCI also partners and collaborates with other programs and organizations to host training workshops, forums, and deliberation teams, or D teams, for students, faculty, staff, and community members. This spring, the DCI hosted 2 forums with the topics Artificial Intelligence and Guns in America, which was attended by over 160 people. And approximately 170 people participated in the DCI Spring D teams, which, led by our student fellows, met 3 times over the course of the semester to discuss different topics in education. I'll now turn it over to Stephen, a DCI fellow, who will be moderating the next parts of the presentation. We'll introduce our deliberation demonstration that we're about to do and talk a little bit about what a deliberation looks like. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Stephen Walker. I'm a sophomore and current fellow in the DCI. Now we're going to host a little mock deliberation at the table over here with our fellows who have come here this morning to present and support the DCI. So we're doing this to show you what it is that these deliberations are, how they actually work, how they play out, and why we do them. So each of the fellows will be playing a role. They won't be themselves. They've all been assigned ahead of time to demonstrate some of the dynamics, the common issues we have to address as facilitators, and how we actually structure and carry out these conversations to make them as respectful and productive as possible. So one thing we do, for example, is describe what our expected outcomes are. And in today's deliberation, we don't expect a group to come up or agree on any specific exact policy proposals, but we'd rather want to focus more on fostering a greater understanding of the different viewpoints on this complex issue. So now I'll turn it back over to the other fellows as they take their seats at the mock deliberation and kick it off. And for those in the audience, if you did miss breakfast, we brought ice cream. So Dr. Balk will be handing that out over there for anyone who didn't get their nutritious stuff today and would still like it. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you all for being here. Yeah. Okay. Thank you all for being here as part of this deliberation. Our topic today is free speech and inclusion. So students sometimes call for safe spaces, trigger warnings, and other practices that are intended to protect them against harmful speech. At the same time, students want to be challenged and to grow, and protecting free speech can help them do that. So to what extent, if any, is there tension between these two goals? If there is, how should we navigate it at Davidson? And if there isn't, how should we help students achieve both goals? So, per tradition, we'll start out with going over our conversation agreements, which just are kind of guidelines to ensure that the deliberation is respectful and productive. So I will start with our first conversation agreement, to be authentic and respectful.
Number 2, to be an attentive and active listener.
Number 3, to be a purposeful and concise speaker.
Approach fellow deliberators' stories, experience, and arguments with curiosity, not hostility.
Assume the best and not the worst about the intentions and values of others and avoid snap judgments.
Demonstrate intellectual humility, recognizing that no one has all the answers by asking questions and making space for others to do the same.
Critique the idea we disagree with, not the person expressing it, and remember to practice empathy.
Note areas of both agreement and disagreement.
Respect the confidentiality of the discussion.
Avoid making absolute statements such as all people think this or no educated people hold that view that overly generalize or dismiss opposing viewpoints.
Awesome, thank you. So now we'll do a little bit of getting to know each other, introducing ourselves. So, share your names, a couple of aspects of your identity that are important to you, hometown, major, pronouns. So I'm Lagan, I'm a senior public health major. I'm from LaGrange, Georgia.
Hi, I'm Urshi. I'm a sophomore economics and philosophy double major at Davidson, and I'm from Pakistan.
My name is Auden. I'm a sophomore bio major from Nahon, South Dakota.
I am Emery Gavalier from Long Island, New York, and I am a computer science and political science double major.
My name is Mishti. I'm a first year. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm in India.
So we'll start out by talking a little bit about free speech as a value and talk about inclusion, and then kind of how to look at both of these values at the same time. And so first question to you, we'll go around once with no crosstalk and then engage in discussion, is how should we understand free speech as a value?
Yeah, I can start us off. I think free speech is a basic human right, no exceptions.
Well, I think that people have the right to express their views, but only as long as those views don't harm others.
Yeah, I think I agree with some of the points already said here, but honestly, I'm maybe not as sure. So
I think Archie and Emery, you've touched on a really clear tension. Like I can definitely see why you would say free speech should not have any boundaries set to it, but I'm leaning towards the fact that free speech without any constraints can harm certain individuals.
I think there have to be exceptions. What about topics or speakers that are potentially triggering to students? Otherwise, groups and speakers will come to campus and spread hateful messages, and that type of speech can be psychologically and physically harming to students.
And I think I understand the point you're trying to make, but when we talk about harm, it's important to understand that limiting free speech causes more harm in the long run, and also that there's a difference between harm and hurt. So for instance, through having uncomfortable conversations, we might see people getting hurt in the moment, but in the long run, it's not really harming them, it's rather benefiting them.
I think that's a really good point of distinction. And while I'm definitely leaning more towards Emery's perspective, I definitely think that that's a really good point, and especially on a college campus where you would want to be intellectually challenged and stimulated. So where do we draw the line is a good question.
So I'm gonna jump in here for 1 second and note how with each question, we go around with the group, we let all the deliberators share their perspective, where they're coming from, and here in our deliberation, we've already struck some disagreement. Archie and Emery are clearly on different sides of the coin, and then Mishti, sort of more of a model deliberators, making efforts to share her own views while also acknowledging the views of her other deliberators. So now back to you guys.
Autumn, would you like to express your thoughts on this?
Wait, sorry. Could you say that again? What?
So let's just, as a general reminder, remind ourselves about the conversation agreements, especially to be an attentive and active listener to our fellow deliberators.
So I'll note here how, I was a little bit too now, maybe not paying attention, and something on his mind. So our facilitator Legan took steps to bring him back into the deliberation, make sure he feels he has space to contribute, and that all the other deliberators can feel heard and listened to. And so by intervening there and making sure he's active, Legan's helping enhance the deliberation and make sure that we can have a productive conversation that includes everybody.
Yeah, I think going back to the question Megan asked, I think all college students are too sensitive these days. I think you can't really have any conversations without the fear of getting canceled or ostracized by the people around you. And I think that's something that we need to be talking about.
Well, thank you for sharing that perspective. Let's try to avoid speaking in absolutes that overly generalize or shut down the conversation. And so I just want to make a clarification of, do you indeed think that all current college students are too sensitive? Some students, a majority of students, and how are they too sensitive?
I think it's definitely most college students who are too sensitive, and you see it in the way that it's affecting campus cultures around the country where free speech or the lack thereof has become such a big issue. But even despite that, I think it is important to expose all college students to the real world.
So we see here one of the big roles the facilitator plays is holding all the participants to the conversation agreements. There, she made a bit of a generalization, like it reminded her not to do that in a way that allowed Archie to reframe her argument rather than just shutting her down and making her feel like she wasn't welcome and her ideas weren't welcome. So their leg was both enforcing our conversation norms, but also drawing Archie in more and making sure she felt confident in making the arguments she wanted to make and expressing her beliefs.
So let's move on to talking a bit about inclusion. So how should we understand inclusion as a value?
I think it makes sense for me to argue that inclusion fundamentally and by definition is inclusive of all viewpoints. So anyone should be able to say what they like.
I think inclusion means that, it's kind of a little bit of the opposite. It's important, and that's exactly why you can't speak about anything and say anything, if what you're saying is harming people. So speakers that may be offensive or harmful should not be allowed really on campus. The most disenfranchised voices of us can't be included if they're threatened by hate speech.
I think this is a really tough question. I'm definitely leaning more towards the fact that certain types of speech can hinder inclusion and your involvement in a community. But at the same time, I do see value in the point that you can't have inclusion per se without free speech as well. But I'm leaning towards certain constraint.
Yeah, I think there's a particular balance that needs to be achieved. Maybe of like valuing both inclusion as a form of opening up the circle and being available to everyone, and then also not limiting the participants' speech and their like activities and their goals.
I guess I just worry that it's not really inclusion if you're excluding some perspectives, even if it is deemed as hate speech by certain demographics.
How can you think hate speech is okay? Speech can have real consequences and even backfire on the idea of free speech itself. If someone feels uncomfortable and they're not included, they won't participate in political conversations anyway, leaving out critical minority voices. That means free speech is only really for those who yell the loudest and say the most vile things.
Emery, that's not what I'm saying. I never said that I think hate speech is okay. I'm just saying that I think that I agree that speech can have real consequences, but I feel like shying away from deliberation can have longer and more detrimental, harmful impacts in the long run. I think we have to allow people to exist in spaces where they feel like they don't have to walk on eggshells, which might be uncomfortable at first, but also help create a platform for all. So in a way, it's egalitarianism because it is a platform for everybody, regardless of what your background is.
Yeah, just to jump in here, I think that what Urshi is trying to say is that inclusion inherently can't have any exceptions, even if you don't agree with everyone's perspectives. While Emery is more on the side of thinking that inclusion can and perhaps should have exceptions. Is that an accurate depiction of Bill's perspectives?
I'd say that's about right, yes.
I think so as well.
Now here again, we see, like again, modeling the ideal deliberation behavior, so listening to the fellow deliberators is just as important as actually participating and speaking yourselves. And so, like, it took a second there to make sure that everyone felt heard, that their views were clarified, and that everyone took a second to acknowledge the views of the two participants who are more strictly on the different sides of this discussion, to keep it going and keep it as productive as possible.
So Emery, I noticed that you seem to be fairly passionate about this topic. Why do you think that is?
Well, I do have experiences with this. When I was a freshman, there was a conservative speaker that came to campus and we was using really inflammatory language. You know, I remember seeing my friends, especially ones that are minorities, walk away from that and want to engage in political conversations. It really turned me off to the idea that free speech has no limitations and shouldn't have any limitations.
Emery, thank you so much for sharing that experience. I think I can really relate to it. I'm a minority student here at Davidson, and that is a worry I have as well. But at the same time, I think she has also brought up really good points about why I would want free speech to be, or speech to be unconstrained on this campus, but that's definitely a worry of mine as well.
And where I do see where you're coming from now, but regardless, I think I might have to agree to disagree with you because at least speaking from my own high school experiences growing up, I felt like the people around me had to self-censor in fear of being ostracized by the people around them. And this happened to a couple of close friends of mine where when they didn't hold the majority view, they were shut out by the rest of society, ended up, damaging their mental health, ended up ruining their own high school careers. So I completely advocate for free speech because I've seen the effect that limiting free speech can have on the people around me.
In the DCI, we put an emphasis on empathy. We don't just want to understand what people's views are, but why they hold them, what sort of deeper values are driving those perspectives. So here we see like it's sort of pushing our participants to be receptive to trying to listen to, understand each other, and try to find a little bit of common ground, even if they don't disagree exactly on this issue.
Autumn, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I agree, maybe more so with Archie.
Do you think you could maybe speak a little bit more about what your views are?
Sure. Yeah, so I think that holding everybody's viewpoints accountable, is important, but I also really emphasize and really align with the principle of having space for everyone to speak their minds, because then we can put those ideas in discourse with each other and then come up with the most productive viewpoint at the end, right?
I think that is a really good point that puts this entire issue into perspective. And I think I definitely agree with the part of that, of having great spaces where people express their views regardless of, or for fear of backlash. So thank you for sharing that.
All right, let's move into this next section of identifying, evaluating, and prioritizing policies. And so what steps should communities like Davidson College take to support both free speech and inclusion?
I think Davidson should actively invite speakers of very different perspectives to speak on campus.
I think that racism is very prevalent on college campuses all over the country. And here at Davidson, we have to do everything to combat that issue. So we really shouldn't be inviting speakers who are known to be offensive or promote hate speech in order to protect our students.
I think being an academic institution, Davidson should invite people that might have contentious viewpoints, but at the same time also leave it up to students to react or protest or engage in demonstrations if they don't necessarily agree with the speaker's viewpoints, and that should be an option as well.
That being said, I don't think those protests, I like support the space for those protests, but I don't think those protests should go as far as disrupting the institution or the event itself, because that in itself is damaging to students, right?
Well, I think in the first place, inviting speakers with problematic views is giving them a platform and legitimizing it. You're encouraging these students to learn from these speakers when they're bigots and racists. They're fascists, really, who want to degrade important voices from our community, and that's just unacceptable.
Well, let's remind ourselves to be respectful and critique the idea rather than the people directly.
Right, sorry. What I really meant to say was by virtue of inviting these speakers to campus, you're legitimizing their views and spreading hate speech. I also think if speakers have a history of inflammatory comments, they shouldn't be invited to campus. I don't believe exposing students to harmful ideas helps them develop as individuals at all, but discourages them from thinking their voice matters in the conversation.
So here again, we see some conversation agreements were violated. There's a little bit of name calling that can shut down conversations, make people feel uncomfortable who don't want to be labeled those things, uncomfortable responding. So then Megan again refers back to the conversation agreements, but then instead of just shutting Emery down, gives him the space to reframe what he's saying to further the conversation, to really get at the ideas, the feelings, the values that motivated him to say that, rather than just saying that and possibly alienating participants in the conversation.
Emma, I think given the arbitrary line between hate speech and free speech, I think it's still important to invite all kinds of different speakers to expose students to these ideas. But at the same time, it is interesting what you talked about, because I agree with you in the fact that I don't think that free speech includes things like racial slurs or harassment. So for instance, if a speaker has like a history of attacking audience members or getting people riled up on purpose, I don't think that we should be giving that speaker a platform.
I appreciate you recognizing that, and I would definitely go further than you in my arguments, but I don't disagree with what you said there.
Well, let's move into our reflections of the deliberation. So we can answer sort of one of these questions if you'd like. If you want to share something that was meaningful or valuable to you during this deliberation, if there's any new ways about this issue that you think you've learned, or just a general reflection.
Yeah, I can start. I think it was most impactful to hear people be vulnerable with their own personal stories and anecdotes. I appreciate Emery, for instance, for opening up about his own experiences, and I understand that that very much impacts how he feels about a certain issue.
Yeah, I definitely was pleasantly surprised that we found some agreement in the end. I've never been able to do that with someone on this topic. And I appreciate you recognizing that, and also for sharing your own story with us too.
Yeah, I think I was a little bit scared of the conversation at first and maybe like bored with it, honestly. But I think like hearing everybody's perspectives and hearing everybody's like diverse viewpoints and opinions really like illuminated the conversation for me and like brought out points that I hadn't thought of myself. So I think I would continue doing this in the future and participate. So.
Yeah, going off of that, I think I really enjoyed the back and forth. I'm definitely more inclined towards certain constraints, but I think the fact that we were able to find some point of agreement is really important and underscores the fact that deliberation can be really fruitful and quite productive. So I really enjoyed that.
Well, thank you all for your time and participation today.
We do a little reflection period after every single deliberation. It's one of the most important parts because it gets the deliberators to pause for a second and acknowledge the progression. And even in cases of disagreement where if things didn't work out perfectly, they can acknowledge that, talk about that, think about maybe why it didn't work and some things that they can personally improve on. So we always give them the space for this reflection period after the deliberation. Yeah, that's all we got for this mock deliberation. Now we're going to talk a little bit about E-teams. So one of the biggest ways we implement the deliberations, and Ms. She's going to present on that.
So in ID teams, we essentially put into motion what we just demonstrated in our mock deliberation. We invite students, members of the community, alums to engage in 2-hour deliberations 3 times a semester. And these are facilitated by our DCI fellows. There's usually a broad theme that overarches all the deliberations of the semester. So we focused on education this semester, as Reagan mentioned. We deliberated on things like school vouchers, college admissions, and since they are 2 hours long, we really have the space to delve into the nuances and the like how multifaceted these conversations are. And we usually make it so that you stay with the same team throughout the semester, so you have room to really connect with other deliberators in your group and see where they're coming from. And it's a wonderful opportunity to build community, really engage with the spirit of deliberation, and reach productive conclusions about really contentious topics. And that's what we do in ID teams. I think Emily is now going to talk about our forums.
All right, hello everyone. Thank you all for coming out. So as mentioned by Lagan earlier, one of the other things that we do as part of the DCI is we hold forums every semester. So this semester we held 2 forums, a guns forum and an AI forum, and last semester we held a forum on democracy, and some of the broader themes that we covered with the democracy one was how the U.S. should engage in foreign relations, and how we engage with other countries and how democracy engages, and what that means. With the AI forum, we talked about what ethical considerations should be taken into account as we move forward into this new unknown era where AI is going to be so big. And with our guns forum, we talked about Second Amendment rights and gun reform, and we did something very interesting with that forum where our panelists, so we invite panelists to all of these who are experts in their field, and we did an interesting thing where instead of having them in a panel, we kind of did what we did up here where we set them up at a table and had them almost deliberate with each other. And we found that we found out people like that a lot, so I think we're gonna continue trying to do that next year. So look forward to our forum events next year. So yeah, thank you. So we're going to go on to talking about the individual fellows projects, and we'll start off with Autumn. So.
Hello everybody, my name is Auden White, and together with my fellow DCI fellow, Emre Govieri, we hosted our deliberation project last week. Our deliberation project was entitled Campaign Policy, Bureaucracy, and the Road to Elected Office. Our project included insight and collaboration from Davidson faculty member and Democratic Precinct 206 Chairman, Greg Snyder. Participants in our deliberation project dissected the mechanisms of the election cycle and explored the roles of bureaucracy in shaping electoral practices and procedures. We're especially interested in campaign finance with regards to Citizens United in 2011, the role of gerrymandering, both partisan Democratic and Republican, and then also with the Electoral College. And this project really spawned from a place of unsureness, or not sure, being unsure about some of the things that were vastly important and vital in determining who the next candidate was, whether they were occupying role in the State House, the governor's mansion, or in the White House. So we wanted to explore more and talk more and find out more about the policies and procedures that shaped our life. Thank you guys.
Hi everyone, my name is Grace. I'm a sophomore political science and art history double major. For my deliberation projects, I focused on the topics of repatriation and ownership in art history. I thought it was really interesting to kind of bring the DCI's work to the art department, which doesn't happen much. So in my project, we did 3 case studies. One on the benign bronzes, one on the Elgin marbles from the Parthenon, and one on the city of Samarra, which was looted in Iraq during World War II. In doing this, we looked at where these works should be now, kind of investigating some of the issues with our current day museum system and where a lot of the works in our current museums come from. So yeah, thank you.
Hello again. My name is Urshi, and
My deliberation project took place about a week, 2 weeks ago, and I worked with fellows Logan and Monty, who are sophomore and a junior respectively, and our project was on transgender medical policies in the United States. And this was a very sensitive topic, and so we navigated it carefully. And we had representation from different organizations on campus. In total, there were about 15 people present. We had folks from Queers and Allies, Davidson Republicans, Davidson Democrats, Davidson Libertarians, and others who were just generally interested in talking about social political issues. We divided our deliberation guide into 3 different perspectives. So for instance, we specifically talked about, let's say, puberty blockers for children or hormones for children who might want to transition or identify as transgender. So once again, this was a sensitive topic, but at the end of the day, we were able to have a 2-hour conversation about it. And in the reflections, I heard from folks about how it was valuable to talk about something with people who had such a different view on it than you did. And once again, I think it was a great opportunity to talk about something that people otherwise wouldn't have talked about on a campus like Davidson's. But thank you.
Hello, my name is Zoe Mosley, and along with Declan O'Donoghue, a fellow sophomore at Davidson, I hosted a deliberation on comedy and humor. We particularly looked at what is allowed in comedy, specifically stand-up, and why things might be deemed cancelable or not fair to speak in a comedic platform. We looked at what the benefits and harms of the benefits and harms of, okay, okay. We looked at how comedy can be restricted within a broader context, and by prompting our members and deliberators with clips of stand-up speeches, we were able to look into why these clips might be deemed as good or bad in the eyes of different ways to evaluate them, whether it was offensive or how it could have been potentially funny or community building.
Hello, my name is Atyantika. I'm a freshman. I did my deliberation project maybe 2 weeks ago, and I was focused on the topic of equitable industrialization. We were specifically focusing on the fact that a lot of so-called developing countries have benefited from events such as the Industrial Revolution, which in history was the main proponent of the effects of climate change today. But if you look at a lot of climate change agreements or climate action agreements, such as the Montreal Protocol, you'll see that the burden of implementing sustainable policies more often than not falls on more developing countries. So we were grappling with the tension of if there is a moral burden that developed countries have to aid developing countries specifically in implementing more sustainable policies. We looked at the best arguments for, we looked at the best arguments against such aid, and we also focused on what these policies might look like, how this aid should be restructured. I did my deliberation online. I had a lot of deliberators come in from Singapore, from India, from Canada, who had a wealth of experience in participating in COP events or interning for big climate activism organizations. And so we were able to have a really fruitful deliberation. So yeah, thank you.
So my deliberation, which took place last week, addressed the question of how, if at all, did Davidson continue to address its history with racism and slavery? So we brought together a group of people across racial lines, and different political proclivities to discuss both the national debate on this question, looking at things like Confederate monuments and memorials and whether or not to take them down, looking at those debates, reflecting on them, and then applying the sort of perspectives they had to the issue with Davidson, with Chambers Hall. Should Chambers have been renamed? Should the college revisit that decision? Or was it right not to rename it? And then looking at the decision to build a memorial to enslaved and exploited people in the historic quad, and whether or not people agreed with that and why. And we worked with a group of people, different backgrounds, different perspectives, to try and find some middle ground, some points of agreement on an issue which is very tough to talk about here and all over the country. And I felt we were able to do that, and it was a very great, fruitful conversation. And I was lucky to be a part of it with all the incredible people who came out to deliberate. So thank you. And now we're going to go to the next part of our presentation, which I believe Emery is gonna direct for us all. Thank you.
So hello, everyone. My name is Graham Bullock. I'm professor of political science here at Davidson College and also the faculty director of the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative. And I just want to, say how amazing our fellows have been. And this was all organized by them. They, wrote their own scripts and organized it. And so I just want to give, just a round of applause for our fellows. So. And then also to note, next to the ice cream over there, if you mixed breakfast, there's some flyers and application information for the DCI Fellows Program, which is opening today. We're opening actually right now. It's available. So if there's any students walking by or around, please check it out and sign up, and you can be a fellow next year. We usually hire about 12 to 15 fellows every year, and they go through a pretty rigorous training process for how to facilitate these kind of conversations, and then they do it. They do it in the forums, in the D teams that you heard about, and then in their own deliberation projects that we just learned about as well. So watch out for that. And now Emery's going to introduce an opportunity for you guys to chat among yourselves and develop an employment.
Yeah, so we left some time at the end so that we could have you guys participate in a deliberation of sorts. So it doesn't look like there are too many, so I think we can all conglomerate at one table if possible. So yeah, and then you guys will have an opportunity to kind of do what we modeled up here and hold to the conversation agreements while also talking about different topics. So yeah.